talking to us about the immune system and how it changes over the aging process. So I'm super excited, so let's get started.
Thank you. So thanks to all of you for coming out on a kind of drizzly, rainy kind of night. I'm really excited to be here, and I hope that you'll have fun. I'd like for this to be pretty informal. So if you have any questions, just pop your hand up and in the middle, and I'll try and cover it if I haven't covered it well enough. So, so let's get started. So everybody ages, okay? Everybody ages, and everybody's immune system ages. And it's a bad thing for you, because as you get older, we all know that when you're an older person, you're going to be more likely to get the flu when the flu comes around. You're going to be more likely actually to get any infectious diseases, because your immune system is just not as good at fighting off infectious diseases. So what we're going to talk about in part is why that happens, and maybe some things at the end that are some ways we're working on to try and fix that. But one of the takeaways here from this slide, this lovely slide of Mick Jagger, is that the way that you age is often starts with what you do when you are young. So this affects all those young people out here too. Okay, so I'm going to start really broadly just to make sure that everybody understands, what we're talking about here. And so most of us have a sort of general idea of what the immune system is and what it does, but it actually probably is more complicated and does more things than you want. And I'll get to the Avengers in a minute. It's not there by accident. So the first thing is that your immune system is your body's way of protecting you. And we all know that your immune system is your way of protecting you from infectious diseases, right? So the flu, any other kind of infectious disease, your immune system is your first and second line of defense against your getting sick, and it's the reason why you get better when you do get sick, okay? But it doesn't just do that. It also gets rid of abnormal cells. Whoops, that was too fast. So, cancer cells. So, cells in your body become abnormal and precancerous or cancerous with a lot of astonishing frequency. And most of the time, your immune system just recognizes them as abnormal and kills them, and you never even know that it happened. So this is called immune surveillance, and this is one of the really important things that your immune system does, is that it goes around looking for things and then kills them, okay? Bad things. Now there are a lot of different cell types in your immune system, and all of them do different things. And now we're getting to the fun part, which is the Avengers. Right? I really like the Avengers movies. I have a teenage son, so I've seen all of them many, many times. Okay. But one of the things about the immune system is that it is, like the Avengers, it's a team. Each one of the members of the team has its own role to play, its own strengths, its own weaknesses. And they work best when they work together. And when they work together, they can defeat alien invaders, right? The other thing that's really similar about the immune system and the Avengers is that sometimes members of the immune system get a little out of control, like the big green guy, right? And the rest of the immune system has to calm them down and get them to reduce their level of energy so that they don't damage things that they're supposed to protect. And that's exactly how your immune system works, okay? The other thing that's an interesting parallel is that all of the Avengers has an origin story, right? And the origin story of a superhero is really important for you to understand their character, understand where they're coming from. It really gives depth to the character unless you really understand them in an important way. And cells in your body are the same way. Immune cells in your body all have an origin story. They all come from a particular place, and where they come from really determines where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And understanding that origin story is really important to us as scientists to understand what they do and how we can fix them when they go wrong, or how we can replace them when you don't have enough of them. So that's it for my Avengers analogy, but I thought it was actually pretty good. Okay. So now let's do some more sciencey stuff. So your immune system is part of your hematopoietic system, which is your blood. Okay, and there are lots and lots of different cell types in blood, and so you can see here that there are all of the ones you probably know about. RBCs are red blood cells. Those are the ones that make your blood red and the ones that give you carry oxygen around. Their platelets are the ones that let your blood clot when you need a blood clot. And then there's all these other cells, and all these other cells are different components of your immune system. And there's actually two flavors of immune system. This is the one you probably are aware of. So these are these so-called white blood cells, T cells and B cells. When you go to the doctor when you're sick and they take your blood and they do a white cell count to see if you're sick, that's what they're counting, okay? There are lots of different flavors of B cells too. And these cells over here, which are called the innate immune system, have really cool names like neutrophils and eosinophils and basophils and monocytes. And these cells are basically the ones that just kill and eat things. That's pretty much what they do, okay? These are called the adaptive immune system because they can modify their behavior and change themselves in the way that they behave depending on what it is that they have to fight. And what we're mostly going to talk about tonight are these guys, the T cells. So T cells come in basically three flavors. Helper T cells are the ones that help B cells make antibodies. So antibodies come from B cells, but they can't do that unless a T cell tells them to do that. There are these cytotoxic T cells. Those are T cells that just go out and kill stuff. That's basically what they do. They recognize infected cells and kill them directly. And then there are these really cool ones in the middle called regulatory T cells. And the regulatory T cells are the ones that calm down the green guy when he gets out of control, right? So they're the ones that are out there looking for cells that are too hyperactive and keeping them down. And they also are out there protecting you against the T cells in your body that if the regulatory T cells weren't around, they would attack you and would create autoimmunity. So they're very important T cells. We haven't known about those as long as we have the other ones, but we know a lot about them now. Okay, so I work on T cells. My lab works on T cells. And so that's why I'm going to talk about them. But they're not important because I work on them. They're important. I work on them because they're important. They are the ones that control much of the rest of this. And so that's why I think they're the most important. Okay, where do they come from? So the origin story for T cells is that they come from the thymus. The thymus is an organ that sits in your chest right on top of your heart. It's right here. And there's a bunch of other organs that are part of your immune system. Your bone marrow is where B cells come from. And you'll note that B cells come from the bone marrow. T cells come from the thymus, and that's really why they're called B cells or T cells, because of where they come from. All of these other ones, the spleen, lymph nodes, you probably heard of those. You probably haven't heard of Peyer's patches, but it doesn't really matter. All of those are places where the cells that the T cells that you've made and the B cells that you've made go and hang out and wait for stuff to do. Okay, so those are basically waiting rooms for the T cells and B cells. And that's where they sit around until somebody tells them it's time for them to go. And my lab, I said my lab works on T cells. My lab doesn't really work on T cells. My lab works on thymus, because that's where the T cells come from. And I'm a developmental biologist by preference, I guess, and by training. And developmental biologists are all about the origin story. That's what we put most of our effort into. So if you want to know about T cells, you have to know about where they come from, and where they come from is the thymus. And that's what I work on. Okay, so this is a picture of the thymus. I know most of you are not going to know what on earth you are looking at, so I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. So this is actually a mouse thymus that we have taken and made very, 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 very thin slices of, and stained it with some antibodies that recognize particular components of it. and then take a picture with a microscope. So the thymus basically has two parts. This part is called the cortex, that's the outside part. And this part is called the medulla, and that's the inside part. Okay? Now, if I show you this diagram, it'll show you where the cells go, and then I'll show you how that matches the picture. So, in this diagram, the T cells are these little green dots. And the thymic epithelial cells, which are the cells that I work on the most, are these ones that look like they're dancing. See these guys? Those are the thymic epithelial cells. And then these guys, the little starburst guys, are called dendritic cells. They're another kind of cell that's also important in the thymus. They're also a blood cell. So, of course, this doesn't really look like this, but now it does, right? So now you can see these two little dotted lines right here. That's the line between the cortex and the medulla, and that's where that line is over here. And these little circles here are blood vessels, and that's what these blue and green things are, is blood vessels. So the way that the cells that are going to become T cells get into the thymus is through the blood system. They circulate around, they're hematopoietic stem cells, they circulate around, they find the thymus, they come in through the blood vessel, right here at this boundary. And then they go through a migration pattern where they go up like this, and then down like that, and that would be up like this, and down like that. And what they're doing while they're doing that is they're encountering different environments, different things that the epithelial cells want to show them in order to get them to move forward to the next stage of development. And this is mostly, at this stage, the early stage, about making more of them. You get one hematopoietic stem cell in the thymus will end up making probably 100,000 T cells. So a lot of this is about them just making more T cells. But they're also doing some other important things while they're doing this. So the key cell type in the thymus are these thymic epithelial cells. They're the ones that do all the work. And in the cortex, they do something called positive selection. And what positive selection is it's making sure that the T cells that you make can work in your body. Okay, basically they're saying, okay, can you see the other cells in the body? And they say yes, and they survive. And if they say no, they get killed. Okay? And then you go to, sorry, this is not my pointer. Down into the medulla, so after they do this big loop and come back down here, now they go into the medulla. And what they do once they go to the medulla is that they zip around really fast, just like that. We have movies of this, it's really cool. And what they're doing is they're seeing lots and lots of different thymic epithelial cells in the medulla. And what those thymic epithelial cells are showing them is little pieces of your body. Basically, they're showing them little bits of proteins from all of your organs and all of your cells. Little pieces of insulin, little pieces of nervous system proteins, little pieces of all of those things, and saying, this is self, don't kill this. And the T cells that react to that and say, okay, then they let those live. And the T cells that react to that by saying, no, I want to kill that, they say, you cannot. And they kill it. And those cells die. There's a lot of killing in the thymus. Most of the cells that are made in the thymus die in the thymus. It's like this giant abattoir of T cells. It makes millions and millions of cells and then kills almost all of them. Because it's hard to make a good cell. But you really only want the best cells. And those are the ones that make it through this process of positive and negative selection and then make it out. And this process means that the T cells that you make are going to actually be able to work and do something. And this process makes sure that they don't create autoimmune disease. Yes?
How long does that take?
Good question. In the postnatal thymus, it takes about 2 weeks, best as we can tell. In the fetal thymus, it's much, much faster, just about 2 days. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be, but most of the cells that you make in your fetal thymus don't contribute to your adult immune system, so I'm not really talking about that tonight, but it is different in the two. Okay. So what happens over the lifespan? So as you age, over the your thymus does not do very well, okay? When you're really young, it's great, okay? So remember I told you that there's the cortex and the medulla, the outside and the inside. In this particular picture, so these are actually pictures of human thymuses, and in these pictures, the outside part's purple and the inside part is pink, okay? And this is what your thymus looks like when you're a newborn, basically, just still a baby. And at that point, when you're born, you don't have any T cells out in your body at all. And that's a big, big problem. So we all know that newborn babies are really, really susceptible to disease, and you're not supposed to, you have to wash your hands all the time. And the reason why is that their thymus, that at the fetal stages, didn't make any T cells that made it out. There aren't any. And so they really need to make a lot. So they have a really big thymus, and in fact, your thymus when you're a newborn is as big as your heart. It's huge. It sits right on top of your thymus and makes millions and millions and millions of T cells every day. And those pour out of your thymus into the rest of your body, fill up your spleen and your lymph nodes and all that stuff. And by the time you're about 6 months old, you're okay. Okay? So if you've had a baby, and you may remember your pediatrician telling you when your kid is 6 months old, you're good. They get very nervous when babies go to daycare before they're 6 months old. And this is the reason why. Okay? So great, you got a big, juicy, happy thymus when you're a baby. And it stays that way for a while when you're a kid. But even by the time you're a teenager, bad things are happening in your thymus. Okay? So these white areas here, all of that, those are fat cells, okay? So for those of us who worry about getting fat as you get older, your thymus cut fat when you were a teenager, okay? And it's a bad thing to have fat in your thymus. Because it basically replaces all the pink and purple parts with these white parts. And the white parts do not make T cells, okay? And the pink and purple parts get broken up into small areas and they don't work as well. And they start to become disorganized. And you know how when things get disorganized, they're just not very efficient. And the same thing is true in thymus, okay? By the time you're 26 to 49 years old, how many people in this room are in this age range, 26 to 49? Raise your hand. Woo! You guys, your thymus is already like really, okay? You think you're young, but your thymus is already failing miserably, okay? Your production of T cells has been going down since you were about 10, okay? So this is not good, all right? Now, oh no. When you get to be over 50, how many of us are over 50? I'm there too. We really have no thymus to speak of. It's just a fatty mess, okay? And we haven't had any new T cells made for a really, really long time. Not really any to speak of. That's terrible. It's a real problem, okay? And this happens to everybody. All right, it starts when we're young and it progresses through our adulthood, and by the time we're old, it's gone. All right? And the result of this is that when you're old, okay, you have increased infection rates. And if you get a vaccine, if you go get the flu shot that your doctor is constantly telling you have to get, it doesn't work as well, okay? And there are increased rates of autoimmunity. That's also because your thymus isn't working properly. Remember I told you the thymus kills all the cells that are autoimmune, and it also makes all the regulatory T cells that keep the ones that escape down. All of that's fallen apart by now. And so increased rates of autoimmunity is directly tied to this. Interestingly, increased rates of cancer, that's that immune surveillance feature, that doesn't work as well anymore. But even heart disease and Alzheimer's disease, all of these diseases, the major diseases of old age, are all linked to failures in the immune system. And if you get a bone marrow transplant for people who are over 50 years old is skyrocketing. It's used for lots and lots of different things, but your likelihood that you're going to recover well from your bone marrow transplant and have a good immune system afterwards is very, very reduced when you're old. And all of this is because your thymus failed. So why does your thymus failing result in all these problems with your T cells? Okay, so T cells actually live a really long time. The T cells that you had when you were young, you still have a lot of them. Okay, they live your whole life. So why does not having a thymus matter? Okay, so this is what happens when you get sick to your T cells. Okay, so you start out over here, and this as adult, this is really like anybody over the age of 10. Okay. You've got a lot of cells, and they're all different colors here. These are T cells, and they're all different colors because each one of them could recognize a different kind of foreign invader, okay? This is called your T cell repertoire, and it's really diverse when you're young. And that means anything you see, any disease that comes at you, you got it, right? You're gonna have a few cells that recognize this infecting agent, and then as soon as they get activated because they see it, they expand up a lot, and then you end up with this huge number of cells. This is that white cell count again, right? And then after you're not sick anymore, after it controls the infection, most of these cells die. And you come back to somewhere around in here, okay? But these cells are now memory cells, right? These cells, because they've never seen what they can recognize, they're called naive cells. But these cells, the ones after it's all over with, that you keep a long time, those are called memory cells. And they remember what they saw before, and if they see it again, they're right there. They're like right on top of it. They kill it fast, and you probably won't even get sick. That's why after you've gotten sick with something once, you probably aren't going to get it again. That's what immunity is. It's these memory cells. That's all great. So what happens when you're old? Okay, when you're old, you have a lot fewer of these naive T cells, mostly because you've been using them up your whole life, right? Every time you get sick, you use them up. But when they do see an invader, they try to do the same thing your young T cells did, but they just aren't very good at it anymore. They're old, they don't proliferate as well, they have a harder time at being activated. And so they expand, but they don't expand up as well. And then when they contract, you make memory cells that are just not as functional. So that's not good. Yes?
T cells as well as B cells, white blood cells. How many T's and B's are all white blood cells?
So all of the T cells and all the B cells are called white blood cells. Yeah. Okay. So the cumulative effect of this, every time you get sick, this happens, right? And so you build more and more and more memory cells, and you have fewer and fewer and fewer naive cells, okay? So when you're young, you've got lots of naive cells and a few memory cells. And when you're old, you have lots of memory cells and a few naive cells. This would be great if all you ever saw was things you've already seen before. But that's not how it works, right? New infectious agents come around all the time, and older people are not as well equipped to deal with them, right? And so this is one of the reasons why when you're old, you have more not very good memory cells. You're not making any new ones because your thymus is gone, right? And that's why you have especially increased susceptibility to new pathogens, but also not as good immunity to things you've seen before. Okay, so this is all bad, and all of this comes back to your thymus because you're not making new cells. If you were keeping making new naive T cells all the time, this wouldn't be a problem, right? You'd still have new ones, but you don't. Okay. So, this is the problem. So now the question is, how do we fix it? That's what we want to do, right? You want to fix this problem. And, one of the things about this is that, this affects every single person in the whole world. Okay, this is a health problem that could not be more widespread. This is everybody. This happens to every single person who was ever born, okay? This is the biggest health problem that we have. But there aren't any patient advocacy groups for it, Probably don't hear about it, the big thymic involution crisis. Nobody talks about that. But it is actually a big problem for everybody, and it impacts huge amounts of our healthcare sector, okay? So fixing it could not possibly have a bigger impact, right? If you want to fix something, we should fix this, right? Because if you fix this, you not only make people healthier in general, right? That they're going to be less likely to get sick, so they also will be less likely to get cancer, they'll be less likely to have heart disease and Alzheimer's and many other problems, right? If you can fix this, you can control autoimmune disease, which is lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and a whole bunch of very common, very debilitating diseases. Okay, so now we all think this is important, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's very important. What are we going to do about it? Okay. So there are several different directions that we can go in here, and there are people who are working on this, so we're trying. Okay. And the first thing you can think about is, well, why don't we just keep the thymus young? Why don't you prevent involution and keep the thymus pumping out new T cells so that you're going to have plenty of naive cells and you won't have a problem, right? And this is a completely legitimate idea. I think this is a good idea. There are some problems with this idea. So the problem with this idea is that in order to prevent something from happening, you have to know what it is, okay? And we don't actually know what causes thymic involution. We have no idea. We have no idea, okay? And that is a real issue. You cannot fix something if you do not know what is broken, right? So there's a lot of basic research that's going to need to happen in order for us to figure this out. And that's really going to slow down this keep the whole thymus young thing, okay? So that's a problem. The other thing is, there might be a reason why. So you might be asking yourself in the back of your mind, I wonder why the thymus does this. I wonder why evolution selected for this. This seems like such a bad idea. Why would this be something that happens? And so we don't know the answer to that. And part of the reason why we don't know the answer to that is that we can't reverse it. Because if we did, then we'd be back up here, right? Where keeping the thymus young is what we could do. But there is an idea that possibly the reason why your thymus needs to involute is that having a big, juicy, young thymus making millions of T cells all the time is not a good thing for you. And part of it might have something to do with autoimmunity. So the thymus tries really hard to kill off all the cells that are just absolutely autoimmune and are autoreactive to you, okay? And it does, it kills them all off. But I told you that there's these regulatory T cells whose job it is in part to go out into the periphery and find autoimmune cells and keep them quiet and keep them from hurting you, okay? What that means is that you have autoimmune T cells in your body, every single one of you. Even if you don't have autoimmune disease, you have T cells in your body that your thymus made that will react against you if they were allowed to do so. Okay? And so the longer your thymus is out there making new T cells, the more of those T cells they're going to make too. And at some point, that's not going to be something that you can suppress. So it's maybe a bad thing to have a young thymus for your whole life. So maybe this is not a good idea. Now we're actually doing experiments in my lab in mice to try and do this so that we can see if that's true, because that would be a good thing to know, right? But so far we have not been successful. Okay, so let's go away. We're not going to keep the thymus young forever. Why don't we just take the old thymus and make it young again? Okay, and this is not a crazy idea. However, there are also some problems with this too, right? So first of all, you still need to know why it involutes, because if you don't know what went wrong with it to make it go through this involution process, then you can't reverse that and fix it, not very well anyway. And so that's a little bit of a problem for this, right? But this one is a little bit further along. So there are some things that you can do, it works really well in mice. Doesn't work quite as well in people, but there are some positive indicators in people. There are some things that you can take that will make your thymus bigger, less fatty, make more new cells, right? And those things that work very well in mice work much less well in people. So it may not be something that ports over. But this is not a crazy idea, and a lot of people are working on this. So far it hasn't worked, but a lot of people are trying to do this because this seems like the best way to go for a lot of people. But The third idea is, why don't we just make another one, a new one, or maybe just make some new T cells, and then you don't even have to have a whole organ. You can just make the T cells that the organ would make and give you that, right? And this is a great idea. This is what we do. Okay. So the advantages of this approach are that we don't have to know why the thymus involutes if we're just going to make a new one from scratch, right? But we do need to know how it develops in the first place. And this is where, for those of you who actually paid attention to my title, you might have noticed that in my title of my talk, the word embryos was there, and I haven't mentioned those yet, right? But this is what we need to know in order to grow a new thymus. You need to know how the thymus develops normally so that you can recapitulate that in a culture dish, basically. And we know a fair amount about that process. And so that, I think, is a doable thing, right? And then you need to know what it looks like in fairly good detail so that you can make sure that the thymus that you made is a good thymus. Because if it's not a good thymus and I put it into you, then it might make some bad T cells and then you'll be mad at me. And I really don't want that to happen. But there is recent progress in our lab and in other labs that suggests that we might be able to make this thymus in a dish also to make T cells for transplant. Now, if we were successful doing that, if I can make a diverse repertoire of naive T cells in a dish from your own hematopoietic stem cells and just give them back to you, then when we're all like 50, and you go to the doctor, the thing you do when you're 50 and you go to the doctor is that he takes some blood, or he uses the cord blood that your parents banked for you when you were born, and they make you a bunch of new T cells, and you go in and you get your 50-year-old T cell shot, right? And then everybody gets a nice shot of T cells, and it boosts your immune system, and you're good to go for another 20 years, right? That would work, yeah.
I'm just wondering, what happens to the level of hematopoietic stem cells in your blood as you age?
Good question. So the people in the back hear the question. So the question was, what happens to the number of your hematopoietic stem cells as you age? So your hematopoietic stem cells age 2, right? I kind of glossed over that part in my enthusiasm for the thymus. But in fact, they do, and some very specific things happen. So their numbers don't really change that much. They do become more inclined to make the cell. So remember the diagram of all the blood cells? And the T cells were on the right side of the slide, and all the other stuff was on the left side of the slide. So when you're young, your hematopoietic stem cells like making T cells. When you get older, they tend to like to make the other kind of cells more. And so they tend to be biased in the wrong direction for making T cells. However, if you take an old hematopoietic stem cell and you put it in a young thymus, it makes T cells just fine, just like a young hematopoietic stem cell. So that's sort of the reason why I don't worry too much about how old your hematopoietic stem cells are, because all you really need is a young thymus. Okay, so that's all great. So, so you want to know how we do this? Yeah. Yes? Okay. Okay, so this is how we do this, all right? So you can start with skin cell, okay? And you give it a gene. So this is a gene that's already in the skin cell. It's just not turned on, okay? And this is a very important gene. We work on this gene. But this gene is called FOXN1, and FOXN1 is a gene that is very, very important for almost everything that you need to do in order to make a functional thymic epithelial cell. Okay? It's a regulatory gene. It spends its life turning on and off other genes. It's a master regulator. It's a great gene. Okay? And if you want to turn a skin cell into a thymic epithelial cell, you really just need to turn on this one gene. And then it turns on everything else. Okay? So if you do that, and you take what's called a mesenchymal cell and you turn on FOXN1, it makes what we call an ITEC, or an induced thymic epithelial cell. And this is what they look like. This is a picture of real mouse ITECs. And they're big and flat, just like thymic epithelial cells. Okay? And if you take those ITECs and you mix them with some other cells, including some hematopoietic stem cells, maybe a few more of these cells, just because they like those cells, and then you mix those cells all up together and you graft them into a random location. In mice, we use the kidney capsule because it's got a lot of blood vessels and it's really easy to get to. It should also work in people, by the way. And you make a thymus. And this thymus will make T cells, and those T cells will go out. And if you do this in a mouse that doesn't have its own thymus, you can make enough T cells to make that mouse be pretty well endowed with T cells. So this does work. This is a picture of a thymus in the kidney. So this is the kidney. This is the thymus it made. You'll notice it's got the dark parts, which is the cortex, and the light parts, which is the medulla. And it makes T cells, all kinds of T cells, all three kinds that you need. So this works very well. Okay, so what if we don't want to go around embedding things into people's kidneys, and we would like to just do this in a dish? Okay, well, we can do that too. So if you take these cells, these ITECs, and you put them in a dish, and you put on top of them hematopoietic stem cells, they will make T cells in this dish. And then you can take those T cells and inject them into a mouse, and they will work. So we can do this in a mouse. We can do it in a mouse, and the mice appreciate it, and it's a good thing. But we can't yet do this in people. We're working on it. Human cells behave a little bit differently from mouse cells, and it's been kind of a little bit of a technological challenge. One of the things that we needed to do was to find a different way to turn on this gene, but that is in progress now. I have a graduate student who's working very diligently on this, and we're making good progress. So hopefully in a few years, I'll do one of these again and tell you about how successful we have been. So this is what we're doing, and I'll take any questions. That's all I got.
Took the shingles vaccination by Zosterfax, and it was the traditional vaccine.
Yep.
Like 50% effective, and then
Right.
as you get older, it's less effective. Okay. But recently, there's a new.
There's a new shingles vaccine. Yeah.
Okay, and it's 90% effective in your 70s because they added some kind of booster to it. Could you explain some of that?
Okay, so what he's asking about is what's the difference between the old shingles vaccine that only worked about 50% well, and the new shingles vaccine which is supposed to work about 90% well. And the short answer is I don't know the details of how the vaccines differ, but I can tell you that the data saying that it's that much better is really true. This is a much better vaccine than the old shingles vaccine. So if you got the old shingles vaccine, you should still get the new shingles vaccine. It does do a better job of providing immunity, and that lasts. So one of the problems with the old shingles vaccine is that it just didn't do a very good job of inducing that immune response. So the way vaccines work is exactly the same way that infections work, right? Your immune system sees something, a few cells recognize it, they amplify up, and then they create memory cells. That's how vaccines work. You get that whole immune reaction, but without being sick, right? And the old shingles vaccine just did not do a very good job of inducing that, particularly in older people. And so it just wasn't seen by the immune system very well. And what they did to the new one, I don't know. But they often will do, to improve vaccines, they'll add something called an adjuvant. And what that is something that really irritates the crap out of your immune system generally in order to try and boost the response to the antigen. And that may be what they did.
Yeah, there was a company called Genius. They
Yeah.
had a patent on some kind of
Adjuvant.
adjuvant.
Yeah.
And they added that onto.
Okay, so that's what it was then. It was just what it basically does is if you just do the vaccine, it'll just sort of activate the cells themselves. And if it doesn't do that very well, it won't give you much protection. But if you add an adjuvant to it, it irritates all the cells. And then all the cells are partly activated. And then when the ones that are reactive to that thing see it, they're sort of primed and they do a better job of reacting to it and making memory cells. So that's why it works better. Yes?
So kind of along with that
when you when people get sick when they have vaccines is really mostly a minor response from that activation of your immune system. Okay, but there is a thought out there that if you get some people who get the flu vaccine get the flu. You didn't get the flu. Okay, you can't get the flu from the flu vaccine or from any other vaccines because you're not being infected with an actual virus. Okay, the thing that they give you for a vaccine is either killed or inactivated. So it can't make you sick. So you're not actually getting the flu or getting the thing. But you are activating your immune system and you're creating all these other millions and millions of cells. And that response can make you feel a little off. Okay? But you can't actually get sick from a vaccine. Not in that way. Yes?
How universal is the final degradation? I mean, are there populations that have complete finus longer than others, or is that really strict?
So how universal is the progression of thymic involution in different people, right? So good news for women. Thymic involution is slower in women than it is in men. In men, it happens super fast. And in women, it takes longer. Okay, so women are slower in thymic involution. There has not been a real widespread survey of people from like different parts of the world or something like that, or even just lots of people. So the way you would know how thymic involution is progressing in somebody, for the most part, is to do an MRI, and people are just not happy about doing repeated MRIs for no good reason. I don't know. So we just don't have the data. But women do have slower involution than men, definitely. Now I said that why? It's probably has to do with estrogens, because thymic epithelial cells, the cells that are important, the cells that I work on, remember those cells? Those cells have receptors for estrogen on them. They also have receptors for androgens, which is testosterone, on them. And so those differential responses probably are protective for women and bad for men. And just one other thing about that, having slower involution sounds really good, but it may not be so really good after all. So one possibility is, for the period of time when your thymus is going through this deterioration, which takes longer in women also, you're making more T cells in a bad thymus. Right? So women have much higher rates of autoimmunity than men. Almost every type of autoimmunity is dramatically higher frequency in women than in men. It might be because your thymus is too slow to involute properly. And in men, it crashes out really fast and you stop making T cells a lot faster. Yes?
Yes, so sort of like piggybacking off of that, is this thymus aging considered across like all mammals?
Oh, excellent question. So he asked if thymic involution happens across all mammals, and the answer is we haven't looked at all the mammals, but yeah, it's quite widespread. Now what we don't know is, do lizards or birds have thymic involution? Again, you have to look at across the lifespan of a wide range of animals at this particular question, and not that many labs work on it, and so it hasn't been done yet. But I think it's a really interesting question as to what point in evolution does thymic involution occur. But it's exactly the same in mice as it is in people, and we diverged quite a while ago. So yeah, it's widespread across mammals. Yeah, in the back.
My broad question is, how can we be good to our thymus? Are there any foods? Are there activities, exercises? A riff on that is about 10 to 15 years ago, I read that Dalai Lama and Dr. Andrew Weil and other people got together at Yale, and they realized that there can be more white blood cells by stimulating T cells in the bone marrow. And as I remember the article, how do you be good to your T cells? How do you tell your
your bones don't make your T cells, so your bones don't have anything to do with your T cells.
Well,
But
shame on Yale.
shame on Yale, exactly. So the thing about your thymus is we do know there are some things that are bad for your thymus. Okay, so stress, very bad for your thymus. Okay. And actually, my lab actually has a research project that we're doing right now to look at how stress impacts the progression of thymic involution. Because we know that when you're really stressed, your thymus involutes rapidly, like shh. And then when your stress is relieved, it comes back up again. But I really don't think, and there's fairly good evidence, that it doesn't come back exactly the way it was before. And so every time you go through a big stress event in your life, you're probably hurting your thymus just a little bit more, right? And so I'm a department head. I have no thymus. There are some things you can do that are good for your thymus. So it turns out that vitamin C is good for your thymus.
Vitamin C.
Yay! Vitamin C is good for your thymus if you, at least if you're a mouse. So if you give a mouse vitamin C supplements, then the thymus stays bigger longer and it looks happier and it looks good. Okay, so it's probably true also for people because most of the things that happen in mice also happen in people. And so taking vitamin C is probably good. It's also really good for your skin. It's really good for collagen. It's good for lots of things. So take vitamin C. More questions? Yeah.
So just piggybacking on this gentleman's question, ultimately, in summary, low stress, vitamin C, all the regulatory maintenance we would otherwise do.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Sleep, etc. That's
Yeah.
really all we can do.
That's pretty much it. And it doesn't matter, you're screwed anyway. You're going to lose your thymus no matter what you do. So, yes, in the back.
When you're exposed to a cold or something like that, the conventional wisdom is they boost your immune system.
Right.
Is that what?
I have no idea. So I don't know why taking zinc is supposed to be good for your immune cells. There's anecdotal evidence that it is, and there's not anything bad for taking it. So go ahead. But I don't know what the mechanism is. So as a scientist, whenever somebody says, "Oh, do this, it will make you better," I want to know what the mechanism is. Well, how does it work, right? And I have no idea how taking zinc would help your immune cells at all. I don't know at all. And I don't know if anybody knows. Does anybody here know? No? Okay. We don't know. Yeah.
There's currently an ad on television that shows the body's immune system attacking cancer cells.
Yes.
What is going on there? That's the first question. The implication is that's the future of cancer treatment.
It absolutely is. Yeah. So immunotherapy is the current most common thing that everybody who works in cancer research is working on, and it's in the clinic and it's actually working extremely well. So what is immunotherapy and why does it work? So I remember I told you earlier that one of the things that your T cells do is immune surveillance. They go around looking for things that don't look normal and kill them, right? So why do cancer cells not look normal? So the reason why cancer cells don't look normal, they came from your body, right? They were a normal cell. But one of the things that happens in cancer is that the chromosomes inside the cancer cell get broken and then refuse in weird ways, okay? And so what happens when you break chromosomes and reassemble them randomly is that you make new junctions, right? These pieces are put together that weren't put together, that weren't next to each other before. And what happens is that you end up making weird proteins, okay? And those weird proteins are not what your immune system recognizes as self. They're not normal. They don't exist normally in your body. And that's how T cells recognize something as alien, okay? They look and they see something that they've never seen before, and they say, and they kill it, okay? And cancer cells look alien to your immune system, and so they go and they kill it. So what's immunotherapy? So if that's true, you would think, well, shouldn't we be able to harness the power of our immune systems to prevent cancer and cure it in people that have it? And people have been working on this for a long time to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are you going to actually make T cells or get T cells that are going to specifically recognize your cancer cells and then give them back to you? And one of the ways that they do that now is that they take your tumor and they take it out and they take it all apart and they look at all the T cells that are in there and they try and find a T cell that will react against the tumor really well in a dish, right? And then they're like, aha, this one is in there because it's trying to kill the tumor, but there's not enough of them. So we'll make more of that one and give it back to you. And then that should do that. And it works really well. So that's one way of doing it. There are some other ways of doing it too, but basically the idea for immunotherapy is that we are just way better at controlling the immune system now than we used to be. And this is the outcome of that, is that we can now take the immune system and use it as a weapon against cancer. And it's very successful. It's one of the most promising things to happen in cancer research ever. It's really, really exciting. And it puts on the horizon a future where cancer is no big deal.
I apologize if I'm going to miss this, but what is the status of identifying specific genes, for example, that may be related to known autoimmune diseases, which may play crucial functions in the formation and function of the immune system?
Okay, so those are two different questions, really. So, so what he asked was, what's the status of identifying genes that are involved in autoimmune disease, and also genes that are involved in the formation of the immune system? And so I'll take the first one first. So autoimmune diseases are interesting. So what happens in an autoimmune disease is that your immune system decides that you are foreign, that some part of you is foreign, and that it must attack it and kill it. And since that is all, your self is always there, your T cells will continue to attack it and destroy it. So if you have rheumatoid arthritis, your T cells have decided that your cartilage is dangerous and must be killed. And it attacks it quite aggressively, right? If you have lupus, your immune system has decided that many of your internal organs are foreign invaders and must be killed, okay? So it's not really so much that there's a genetic basis for autoimmunity. There hasn't really been any evidence that there's a genetic basis for autoimmunity. Predisposition for certain kinds of autoimmunity has an inherited component to it. So if you have relatives that have rheumatoid arthritis, you might be more likely to get rheumatoid arthritis. But people are really likely to get rheumatoid arthritis anyway. Something like 20% of all women are going to get diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at some point in their lifetime. Okay? That's a lot of people. And in fact, so what I think this really is, more so than a specific genetic predisposition or gene that's responsible, is that it's a failure of your immune system, right? It's a failure of your regulatory T cells to do what they're supposed to do. And so this is more a consequence of aging than it is anything else. Your number one risk factor for cancer and autoimmunity is how old you are. If you're old, you're much more likely to get those diseases. It's the number one risk factor. It outweighs everything else, including family history. So I don't think that there's much evidence for a genetic component for most autoimmune diseases. As far as the immune system is concerned, we know a lot about the genes that control the immune system. And there's been a lot of work on that. And so, at least for T cell, for all of the hematopoietic lineage cells, for all of those hematopoietic cells, we know a lot about how they develop. We don't know as much about how thymic epithelial cells develop, because there's not very many labs that work on it. You know, there's like I usually tell people there's like 10 labs in the whole world that work on those cells. And that's been true for my whole career. And so there's just not very many people working on it, and we don't know as much, but I have a new project to find some new ones. So maybe I'll tell you about that later. Eric?
We have time for one last question.
Okay.
Okay, I have 1.5 questions. So, so your iTech cells in vitro to develop T cells in vitro. So, how do they're from the skin, right? So, how do they do positive and negative selection for all the proteins in the whole body when they're just from skin?
Right, so how is it that iTechs, which started out as skin cells, how can they do the complicated things that techs can do if they came from the thymus? And the answer is that FOXN1, which is that critical gene that we use to make them, turns on all the genetic programs that are on in thymic epithelial cells and really converts the cells into a thymic epithelial cell. So they used to be skin cells, but they're not skin cells anymore. And when we look at if we look at all the genes that are expressed in a thymic epithelial cell and all the genes that are expressed in a skin cell and look at all the genes that are expressed in an iTech, the iTech looks like a thymic epithelial cell. It expresses a lot of genes that you will find familiar. So MHC class 2, all of these kinds of really important genes that we need to have in order to have functional cells, in order to do positive and negative selection, they're all there. So you just need FOXN1, it turns on everything else, and then the whole party's there.
That's a great answer. My last half question is, how did you get the white blood cells all over these sofas? Those are white blood cells, right?
It was synchronicity.